sitting is dying. You have to be able to move and to stand up and work like this, or sit down and move around. You cannot be sitting all day, 8 hours in the same space. It's criminal. Yeah. Studies that are showing that all that Bauhaus, all that modernism architecture was built from trauma. The guys who started this movement were having trauma through the Second World War, and that trauma was in their bodies.
This conversation with Nuria made me realise that the spaces around us are shaping us long before we consciously notice them. We explore biophilic design, neuroscience, human-centred environments, regenerative thinking, and why the spaces around us shape us far more than we realise. Nuria helped me see that the space is never neutral. The environments we live and work in can affect our stress, energy, creativity, sleep, attention, well-being, and sense of connection. And this is not just about making spaces look nice or adding a few plants. It's about designing from the understanding that humans are part of nature, that our bodies respond to light, air, movement, texture, sound, and rhythm, and that spaces either support life or slowly drain it. We talk about workspaces, homes, sensitivity, restorative spaces, values, and why design should not only serve efficiency, aesthetics, or profit, it should serve life. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Nuria. It was great for me, so let's dive in. Okay, so welcome to Vantage Point Conversations. I'm your host, Colin Parsons, and if you've been here before, you know that I get to have interesting guests and I get to basically ask loads of questions about them. Something maybe I know a little bit about, something I know nothing about. And again, today I know nothing about it, but I do have a lot of curiosity around this subject. So my guest today is Nuria. Am I saying it correctly?
Perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. But your surname, really don't want to sort of try that because I'm not sure about the pronunciation. So do you want to just fill me in on that? And then, yeah, just give the audience just an intro into your world, highlights, lowlights, anything in between, anything that you think you'd like people to know about you. And then we can just jump into the conversation from there.
Okay. So first of all, Colin, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. It's really great pleasure to be here with you and with all the people that are listening to us. I don't know from where. So my name is Nuria Muñoz Arce. Well, my last second name is means tree, a maple tree, and my name in Arabic, I'm Spanish, but in Arabic means light. So there is a combination of the work I'm doing and my name, and so I'm going to explain. I'm helping people design spaces that don't just look beautiful, but actually these spaces are supporting life, human life, and also planetary life. So this is called life-centered design. And one of the tools or one of the philosophies I'm using is biophilic design. And I do it through different things. So I design myself spaces, I consult, I teach designers and change makers around the world about this and about what the benefits of this. And I mentor people who want to lead from a deeper place. So mentoring or facilitating retreats. And everything that I'm doing is rooted into one belief. It's that when we reconnect ourselves, people, to nature, to ourselves, actually, through the spaces they inhabit, something really fundamentally shifts. And this shifts in them and through them into the world. So that's my motto.
Fantastic. I love it. Just going to pick up on your name then. Because that seems like a coincidence, like a happy coincidence, or just how did that come about? That's have you always been that way? Is it something you've been um, aware of, your environment and how this shapes us, or is this just things that have just lined up?
No, Colin, and that's thank you for that question. This is something that came out through big inner work, and it started around 8, 9 years ago when I went through a big breakdown, like burnout, and I started to wonder about everything in life, everything, my work, my life, why, and started finding like answers to that. And through that, yeah, things started to make more logic and started to weave all those answers into what is my purpose, what is my soul's purpose, and from there, this thing started to unfold. So no, if it's never been clear, I think I've been living most of my life in a in a box, and all of a sudden the box opened, and yeah, beautiful things start to happen. So yeah, it's never
Wow.
been something that I was aware of until I say 8 years ago, and still learning. It's a process, and yeah.
It's, if you don't mind, because your work isn't something that I've really come across before. That's not to say it it doesn't exist. It's just in terms of me knowing anything about it. Um, what were you doing before? Were they worlds apart? So it's literally you've gone from like polar opposites. What were you doing before?
Well, before I was, well, for you to know, I'm right now living in Valencia, Spain. Before, I was living in Belgium and I was working in the fashion industry and helping retailers to make those spaces that thrive, either by design. So I was decorating spaces, or either by selling, or I had also myself 8 shops. I was managing fashion shops. So that was like very fast consuming world. From the outside, everything looked amazing, like a beautiful house, a good company, good companies. Everything looked really successful, but I really felt like in a golden cage. And as long as I remember, yes, I was thriving in that world, but it was nothing that made me really proud of. I was really kind of faking it in there. And that was the world. So I was born in the Basque Country, and yeah, in the Basque Country, I don't know if you know about Basque Country. Basque Country, it's always raining, so it's really greeny, a lot of mountains, beautiful landscapes. Uh, but in that situation, we had some political issues, so it was always like, yeah, you couldn't say so much about yourself. You had to be like very, very careful. We had the ETA, we had Franco. That's the time I was born, and there was a big footprint on how we lived in there. So that was the landscape that was shaping me. And inside me, I was not like, I was not happy living there, not because it was not a beautiful place, but it was more about, I needed to explore more. So yeah, I went to different countries. I lived in different countries. I moved to Belgium, and there I started to do what I really wanted. Because before I moved to Belgium, I had to follow the rules of patriarchy and the rules of everything what was expected from me. Be good, be smart, study something that's going to make you lots of money, and not something that you like. At that time, I wanted to be an interior designer, but I was, well, not allowed to do that. So you go to business management, you do the good things. This is what's going to give you money. And yeah, then I moved to Belgium. I just escaped when I finished studying. I just escaped to Belgium. And that's where I started little by little find my way. First, I had to learn the languages there. After that, I said, okay, now I want to go to study interior design. And that's where I started to do my own life. But still under those masks that, yeah, life had put on me. If, yeah. I could go on
Yeah.
and on. Sorry, Colin.
No, no, but it's that for me is super interesting because um, actually you were following a path, and that interior design that sort of felt like a calling, something that you wanted to do.
Mm,
Um, but that green country, that idea of the environment where you came from, so it feels like it's a combination of many different aspects in your life, and you said so many amazing things in there because people listening to this, that golden cage, all of these rules and this structure, we often fall into that trap. That's I think more common than it isn't, because ultimately I feel that we often, we fall into our jobs. Maybe we've got an idea and we kind of just go, okay, I'm going to do this, and often it's driven by money or success or something along those lines. And within that, it's very constricting. You feel that, you start out and you don't know anything about work. It's all an experiment and can be fun. And, you're just learning as you go. And then oftentimes, because you become good at what you do, you kind of do get trapped. People say, oh, you're doing well, you get a promotion, you get a pay rise, etc., etc. And then that becomes very difficult to move away from, because you've built a life around it. And, um, and again, people also don't want you to move away from it. And I've been there as well. And I, I've often felt, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot, and I don't know if it was imposter syndrome, but just felt very strange in my body. Very, just, I was always in a place and I felt it was just not quite right. Things, again, like you say, on the outside seem very good. And, and then you look around and you look at other people and you go, oh, well, what am I complaining about? I actually have it very, very good. And so there's a lot of, in what you've actually said, that I think a lot of people could probably resonate with. And one of the reasons I started, when I had the idea for doing these LinkedIn Lives, it was around work, and people. And um, it's I wanted to sort of change people's way of thinking about work, um, not to convince them they should do something else, but just to bring an awareness of that there are other ways of things existing in the world. And this conversation is one of those, because we're going to talk about your work and how it comes about, where it starts and everything like that. And I think one of the reasons I was so interested in it, because I worked in corporate for a long time. And um, one of the things that I really struggled with is, we would change buildings. So I worked for a lot of banks. Um, and, banks either owned or rented different buildings, especially in London. And then there would be a decision to move to a different building, maybe a different one that we were renting, or they sold the one that we had, to make a profit, and we'd rent somewhere else. And we don't think about that. It's just basically you say, right, it doesn't matter how many people in the company, someone makes a decision somewhere and now we're going to move. And that is basically done, I would suggest, from a financial perspective. And I don't know what part of my personality this is, but I really struggle with the change, but also the environment of where my desk is and how it is. And the challenge I've always had is that you didn't really have a voice within all of that. You were an employee, you signed up for the company, and whatever they said goes. And I became more adaptable to it, but I remember sitting in some desks, some spaces that are just, oh, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted to shut down. And I can think of even when I've done like work experience in different places, like rooms with no windows and just basic things. And I remember getting these feelings across my body, like I need to get out of here. Not claustrophobic feelings, but just, this is really difficult. And the challenge with that is that you can't really express that to your manager or anyone, because it's a part of you that is just like, well, no, you're being paid. You sit at the desk. We've given you a desk. Feel
Right.
grateful for that. And you really can't express that, okay, look, I don't feel that this is the good environment for me. You know, I remember being in one place and we all complained because we said, look, it's not bright enough. And they were talking about getting desk lamps for us. And I was like, okay, that's a good thing. But that's the bare minimum, like a desk lamp. It's just like, so I've given you a bit of a window into my world and how things are. And I don't know. I don't like the word sensitive because I don't know if that's a male ego thing, but I think um, I think it discounts things in terms of that if it's sensitive, then, you know, you're not strong. And it seems to give the wrong impression. And I don't think it's that. I think it's more actually like a superpower of awareness. Okay, something's not right. Something doesn't fit. And normally that's frowned upon. You shouldn't do that. Just get on with your work and, you know, um, but actually being aware of something's not okay and raising that takes courage, etc. So I know I've done a lot of talking there. Where do you want to pick up on any of those things? You know, yeah, anything you want
Yeah.
to tackle with that
Lots of
first?
them, all of them.
Let's go.
I wrote
Let's
them.
go.
I wrote them down in the meantime because we're like, oh yeah, that's it. Well, thank you for sharing that, and I will weave it. I'm glad I wrote it down, 'cause otherwise I forget the whole thread. But you were talking about voice, like when I was working in those spaces, we didn't have like a voice, and that's what it's happening in most of the spaces, work spaces, educational spaces, even homes. We're creating spaces where it's for the sake of a good return on investment for money, but not we're not thinking about the people, and we're not thinking about the nature, the ecology around it either. So that's something that it's very important, and that's why nowadays we have neuroscience and new architecture, which is giving the evidence, as well as biophilic design and many other philosophies who are giving people need science, even if we feel it, and we'll go into that sensitiveness. We need something to prove, like, okay, yeah, that's what I'm feeling. There are studies there. It's been backed up through so many papers, so many studies that researchers have done, and it's proving that actually our spaces are making us sick, and that's something we know. So we are calling ourselves already like between, space doctors, because we know the impact that space has on our health and well-being, on stress levels, on sleeping, on our sleeping way of our health, sleep or not, which is connected to the circadian rhythm, so our internal biological clock, uh, connected to many other aspects. So when we're talking about health and well-being through spaces, this is one of the pillars, which is not being seen yet, and it's not known. We know about eating good. We know about moving. We know about being mindful, about, maybe meditations. All those things are coming out right now. It's a big thing that people start to be like, okay, doing yoga. We talked about that before. Or meditating. Oh, this is good for yourself. Well, the spaces we're living in are as important as what we already know. First of all, in a physiological way. So we are putting a lot of chemicals and a lot of bad stuff in our spaces through all these uh, materials, which have, lots of plastics and bad components. That's one. But the other one is what's doing unconsciously to our daily routines. So being sensitive, I'm hypersensitive. I feel spaces. I've always felt spaces. I'm always like really serious. I have headache here. Why? But being sensitive it's a gift. Uh, and I see it like I don't know if you remember that before the miners used to go into the mines and they had this cannery. They had these
Uh-huh.
birds and they were the canaries, if there was a gas outreach or something was going on, the canaries will start singing. So they could say like, "Oh, danger, danger, come! You get out of here, and then you're not going to suffer." So we are doing the same. That sensitiveness on, around people, around spaces, is well, we feel it before other people feel it. We all feel it, consciously or unconsciously. Actually, 95% of the things that we're living is unconsciously. We're not conscious about it. 95%. But as a high sensitivity or such as a sensitive person, we are feeling spaces much harder. So we might feel depleted easier in space, or we might thrive easier in a certain flourishing spaces. And that's a gift. I can say that and I'm very proud to say it. I usually I was told when I was a kid, don't cry. You're too sensitive, too kind, well, that's a gift. And I'm fine with that because now that this all science is corroborating that this is something that we are feeling it upfront. Okay. So that's something that I wanted to bring into, and workspaces. That's a big thing. Uh, yeah, industrialization, capitalism has done lots of bad things. And one of them is creating spaces where we have to put like thousands of people in a building, make them be really, really productive. And they have to work 8 hours, the most out of it in that space. And we're not going to think about them. We're not going to think about how they flourish when they're feeling good. Where is the space that is going to make them feel better? We're not going to think about how do they restore themselves. We need some attention restoration moments where we just get that, and then we come back to our workspace and we feel better. So these are called restorative spaces. All that it's never been thought about, and now through that science, through biophilic design research, through and biophilic design is based on many philosophies. I could go on: anthropology, environmental psychology, neuroscience, ancient wisdom, so many things. Um, that's where we're getting information. We're still not 100% there. There is a lot of research that has to be done. But at the same time, I say we used to know it. Ancient wisdom knew about all these things. We have been building in the ancient times in ways where people could flourish with natural materials, with the right air and temperature conditions, with the right lighting, with the right things that made us thrive. We just forgot all that. We don't want to remember that because of, we need to do it fast now. No windows because it costs a lot of money. Square spaces because it's easier to build in square than to create some rounded spaces. So yeah, you see, where I could talk forever, Colin.
No, that's I love that. It's I was just thinking though, are we all different in terms of what we actually need, or is there some sort of principles or guiding thing that's consistent between all of us? Because I was thinking, you said, in offices, we're sort of, you know, I think about some of the companies and they have created like open floor spaces where I've worked. But when you look at the open floor, they're all very the same thing. They've tried to pick like a same color palette. And I remember one of the companies I worked at was quite heavy on grey. And at some stage they said, they did a survey and they said, oh, people are missing a bit of color. And so they would put up these temporary dividers with a bit of color. But as an open space, you think, oh, okay, I quite like open spaces, and it was surrounded by glass. It was quite a tall building. The challenge was you go onto any floor in that building. And they were the odd ones that were a bit of a different layout, but they were pretty much centered around, you know, toilets and lifts were in the middle. You'd have a, maybe a coffee machine area, maybe a few seating areas. But that, and at the time, it seemed revolutionary, like to sort of say, well, okay, well, you're considered. But I remember just going, well, I would come out, say you'd have to go and find someone else on a different floor. You come out, and it took me a long time to even orientate which side of the building I am, because it looked the same. It was just like, okay, like and it played such an impact. But then my question that I started there with, let's say you've got 1,000 people in a building. Are those 1,000 people, are there fundamentals that you need to um, follow, and then everything else is a bit more bespoke, as in each person should have a design for their own unique space? Because then I was thinking, well, companies are not going to do that, because they don't want to invest in that. But then I was thinking about your comment about shoving everybody into the same space. Feels very much like, like we call them battery farms, like for
Like the chickens.
chickens. Yeah. And
Yeah.
you just go, yeah, you're just going to work and, do your thing. And then free range is almost like, yeah, they can go outside for when they want. So sorry, there's a few questions in there. So is there like fundamentals we have to tick that are aligned to all of us, or is it all different for every sort of person? And if so, how do you then try to manage all of that?
Okay, great question. Yes, we're all different. We are even seeing that we're all neurodivergent. So we're talking about neurodiversity. Some people with dyslexia, they're neurodivergent, ADHDs, DLDs. Well, we've seen that we all have something different from each other, even if they want us to believe that we are all fitting in the same box, the same battery box. And it's not like that. So, um, that's a tricky thing to design for 1,000 people in a building. But there are certain rules. And one of the first rules is to listen. So listen to all the parties. So when we are doing some charrettes, it's called, it's a way to design and to get to the first stage of designing. So first you have to collect information, collect bad information of the ecology, of the lighting, all that, but also of the people. And this is major thing. So first of all, what are the values of the company? What are they aiming to? Are we going to be able to translate those values into the design? But secondly, and for me, it's the most important thing, is what type of people are there? And by knowing that we're all different, having that into account, that we cannot all thrive in the same space with the same light, with the same things, then we have to think like, okay, how can we give a bit of autonomy to each of the people working in that space? That one. And there are some rules. And I think, and I do believe that the rules of biophilic design are rules, and they're not rules. It's more than a rule. It's a philosophy. Is thriving, or is getting there where we can create something where everyone is going to be good, but in combination with different things. For example, I was talking about restorative spaces. You cannot be sitting. First of all, sitting is dying. You have to be able to move and to stand up and work like this, or sit down and move around. You cannot be sitting all day, 8 hours in the same space. It's criminal. I think it's crazy to think that. So how do you create a movement, the flow in that space that you're going to create that people are going to start moving around spaces? That's very basic, but that's one. Knowing that we're coming from nature, we've been thousands and thousands and thousands of years in nature. Our minds are still not in evolution as technologies. If we look that we are still thinking like that primate human in nature, we have to create those spaces that makes us thrive as we used to thrive then. So what is that? That's biophilic design. That's recreating those spaces of nature inside. And I'm not talking about putting plants and and putting everything in green and painting green walls and no, it's not about that. It's the intention of creating that space, like having an open space, having a refuge space, having some mystery, creating spaces where you have tactile differences, scents, lighting, air. So it's a variety of things which are going to make us feel a bit better. And we are not all thriving in the same type of spaces. But biophilic design, I could dare to say that it's like a good average, and it's not an average, it's an important thing, but a good average that we could implement in the workspaces, for example, and people will start thriving there. But how do you start designing? Well, as I said, listening to people. So listening to stuff. Of course, you cannot put them all 1,000 people on a in a meeting room and start asking them like, "What do you like? Where do you thrive?" But we do have like certain mini samples of people working in different departments and different layers, different with different activities, and everyone counts, from the cleaning lady to the CEO to the new student to the person who comes from UPS to bring something. So the entire community is important. And that's how we start creating those maps of feelings, of activities, of desires, of what work outcomes. And it's a complex thing, but that's where we start, how we start with. And then if we put, again, neuroscience or new architecture into that pot, knowing that there's a lot of research behind, which is telling us, for example, high ceilings are making us feel more creative. Why? Because we tend to look upstairs out to the ceiling and doing this. When we're putting like that, our whole body is going like this, and it has something with our physiological way of standing, where we feel better, more creative, and we thrive in the space for a certain thing. For other things, you need lower ceiling. So putting all those things into layers, then you start creating spaces for activities and not for 1,000 people, the same thing. So it's a mixture. It's like directing a whole orchestra and making that each of the playing parties is thriving, and it's making that a harmony at the end. Yeah.
So there's so much in that I want to dig into, because we talk about sort of high sort of stress levels and anxiety, etc. One of the common solutions that is offered is about going outside, going for a walk, and if you can get to nature, that's almost like that's the pinnacle of starting. So it's not necessarily about the duration of your walk, but it's going and walking in nature. Now, I've never come across someone that has a problem walking in nature. I think there's a fundamental, like, physiological connection. The how your mind works, your senses are not overloaded, but they're it feels like you've gone back home in a way. That's the best way I can describe it for myself. Even if there's, maybe some animals or whatever in there. I'm not talking the jungle necessarily. Excuse me. But, like the local areas of woodland or something like that. And, you know, and, just even the terrain, is it a path? Is it, having to walk over leaves, and I think about kids. A basic pleasure for children is in autumn, just running through the leaves. The noise, the sensation, almost like that cushioning. And I would dare anyone to not love that feeling, even as an adult, we talked about this. I've got 2 young children, and as an older parent, I think one of the amazing things about that is that you get to almost become a child again. And I don't actually think it's about becoming a child. It's just allowing yourself to reconnect with those things that bring you joy. And yet the outside world, if you will, kind of has told you that that was wrong or childish, or, that there's no place for that in adulthood. Yet whenever you see it, whenever you do it for yourself or you see anyone else around, and people have let themselves go enough, not so constrained, they're having the time of their life. And so that whole nature thing it's so fundamental. And then you said it's about not just putting plants in the office, because when you started talking, I was like, yeah, I've seen that before. People just put loads of plants. And I was like, how does that work? Do we just paint everything green? And then in your next sentence, you literally said that's exactly not what you're talking about. But I love the 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 comparisons there, because it's not, it's a space, but there's within that space, there's areas to perform or think or to regenerate. And all of those can be in the same space, in the same, let's say, the same floor of a building. But you go, okay. And I've never seen that done before. I had a conversation with a lady a couple of years ago, and they're building a new building in Luxembourg here. And the lady was very forward thinking in terms that she really was engaging with the employees. She wanted them to kind of define the space as much as possible, but not so rigid that it couldn't be changed. Some things are so, okay, all this building work is really, got to be foundational and you can't change it. And she said that she wanted it to evolve with how the work evolves, how people evolve. And at the time, we're talking 2-3 years ago, and I was kind of blown away by, like, whoa, okay, that's what an amazing thought. And then she said the challenge with that is about trying to consider everybody's opinions and kind of filtering that down, into some fundamentals that actually works. And it's the first time that I'd ever come across someone that had thought about it from an employee's perspective. And it never came out in the fact that she wanted everyone to be more productive, which is normally the signal. It's just like, how do we create an environment so we can get more out of these people? Whereas your approach is, how do we do something for people where they can thrive? And by thriving, a byproduct is more creative, more thoughtful, more relaxed, more calm. And it's very interesting in terms of and you talked about the science of all of this, which is amazing and a little bit sad at the same time, because we need science to back up before we change anything. But the reality is that we really know a lot of this stuff. We do need some parameters to help us move and structure and like give us some sort of framework to work from. But without science, without a tangible thing, nothing really gets changed, which I find very sad, because then my head was thinking about all the conflicts, all the negativity, the people feeling depressed, getting sick, etc., all from their environment. Yet, because it's not measured, the only thing that is ever measured is, that person's off sick. And so we go, right, we look at that person. And then oftentimes, if that's not okay, or we say, look at that department, their turnover rates. So then we blame the people within. We don't look at the space. It's not something that's even considered. We're looking for the things that we can put our finger on. And we never go beyond that, right? And that's in the world that I've existed in. And now you can bring that in and start to think about the environment within that company. That's that's huge. But I would imagine that's quite a challenge to try and convince people that have been doing things, go, no, they'll just work. They're just gonna squeeze out as much as we can from these people. And so in all of that, my question is, how do you reach the people that care so much about their people that they're willing to put the effort, time, and energy into doing all of this?
Yeah, well, you pointed out our biggest challenge right now. So this whole thing, which is called well, there are different layers. We could call it regenerative design. We could call it evidence-based design, flourishing design, new architecture, biophilic design. There are different philosophies around this making people and planet flourish philosophy. This is quite new. But it's been there always. We forgot it. And now it's being brought up. It's quite new. So you can see it as when you launch a product or a service into the market and you have like a curve. Okay. It's launching and then it stagnates. And at that moment, it's like everyone is following its normality. So we're at that point of early adoption, which is called. So early adoption, that's coming from marketing, from sales. You need to do a lot of advocacy, a lot of explaining and education and almost convincing people. But this is something which it's not a product, so it's not like something extra. This is good for our health and well-being, but you need to advocate and educate people for that. Situation right now for us, architects, designers, landscapers, lighting specialists, etc., we're coming from an educational system which is based on that industrialization. So the norms are what you have seen in your workspaces, what we are seeing, what's being built right now in every city. That's the norm, and that's what we learn. That type of furniture, that type of um, yeah, to maximize everything at a certain point. As an architect, you start this path with passion, with something that this is something like, okay, I want to do something beautiful for humanity, for the planet. Throughout the years, and that I've been talking to many, 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 many of them. Throughout the years, you're being guided, and still, yes, you use your passion, your creativity, but the norm is that modernism architecture. So that's what we know. And that's something I'm going to say, and many people don't know about this. There are studies that are showing that all that Bauhaus, all that modernism architecture was built from trauma. The guys who started this movement were having trauma through the Second World War. And that trauma was in their body. So see how everything is connected. This is the weaving of everything. We are connected to everything we're doing and the other way around. So those guys, they started this movement, the Bauhaus movement, the modernism. And those, like these buildings with lots of glass, what we see in every city, this became a norm. It is a norm right now. And neuroscience is telling us that this is making us sick. So what did we do? Why? So we went back and analyzed why this happened. Again, industrialization. There are other hidden agendas behind that are throwing us to do this type of design. So educational wise, we still see that in architecture, in design, we're still following that. Products are being also done and produced for that, not for the new thing. So it's a completely paradigm shift that we have to do. Like understand that, first of all, climate-wise, sustainability-wise, we just fucked it up. Sorry for that, but we just, yeah, that one. But also for us, humans, we are missing the boat here. We are really so traumatized, and our spaces are not helping us also heal those traumas that we are carrying throughout generations, throughout our lives, etc., etc. So, as you see, it's a big thing. But what we do believe is that by reconnecting to nature, and biophilic design is one of the gateways to that, regenerative design, flourishing design, to reconnecting to nature, being that child again, and not because of being a child, because of that joy that we have of being outside, because we are programmed to be outside and to be and play with mud and climb trees and this type of behavior. This is us. Well, reconnecting to that makes us feel better, makes us feel alive, makes us feel, even if people are still like, why are you talking about this hippie stuff? It's not. And from that reconnection to ourselves, we're doing two things. First of all, as designers, architects, we implemented that in our spaces. But as human beings, we are healing from those traumas that we're carrying on. And that makes us better people. That makes us flourish. That makes us healthy. That makes us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go on. So education. And that's why that's why I had to switch at certain moment. I got this goal for advocating for this and for educating professionals on this, creating symposiums, creating retreats, facilitating retreats where people can feel how their body changes through this type of nature connectedness, forest bathing, they call it, exercises, et cetera, that we can do it ourselves. It's not so difficult, but we forgot it. And we have to remember what we knew. So yeah, you see, it's a big advocacy and educational situation that we are right now. But I see in the last 7 years that I'm working on this, there is more and more and more evidence coming out there. I sometimes say enough of evidence. We have enough evidence. Let's open up that Pandora box of the evidence and do more instead of just researching more. But that's where we're at. So educating people, communicating, and living by example, and with big hope that at certain moment the big real estate developers, which are really focused only in return on money on their investment, that they start thinking on return on well-being, return on values, which are other values, which are going to have a ripple effect on everything. If you're working in a workspace which is giving you that thriving, flourishing, feeling, it's not only for your work. You go home and you're happy. You have a nice conversation with your wife. You're super happy with your kids. You're not grumpy. So it's so super simple. And at the end, we may complicate it so much. So yeah, that's.
Yeah. It's you've used the word values a few times now, and that's it's something that I struggle with a lot of companies, because values is something that people put on their website, and during the interview process, you're sold all of these values, and then you start at the company, and then you realize, oh, hang on, they are just buzzwords. The reality is, and for me, values should be everything that you see. It's not always in every single detail, because if it is, great, but you should be able to feel those values rather than necessarily see them. And that's the way that you're dealt with, how you're considered, how your clients are managed, how everything is done, and that really is the values. And I think people should be just a bit more honest about their values rather than just sticking up buzzwords. But I've never really considered the connection between values and working space and environment. But there are people that I've come across that really value this stuff, and I feel that you wouldn't necessarily need to convince them that this is a a good idea because of those values are. And for me, I've had this conversation a few times. The person right at the top really is the one that's sort of setting the values. Maybe the founder of the company normally. I know there might be a change of CEO or something like that. But ultimately, that person, if they've done their job correctly, have hired people based on values, and, um, just not hired and just said, "Oh, we need someone," and just put them there. Those people then start to emulate or are very much aligned with the values of the CEO, or the founder, which is effectively the company. And they are true values that come through stuff. And you can only really affect change at that top level. And I've talked about this before. I know you can have an impact, targeting different teams, in different areas, but real change comes from the top, and it's about convincing those people. And so then keep this word money keeps coming through in my brain. And so I think we should sort of tackle that. But your last sentence was that we kind of overcomplicate stuff. And I think especially in the world of technology now, we are connected more than we've ever been. And I think we live in a space where we feel that more is better. But even in my own world, in the business that I've created here, it's easy to keep adding more. But where I get better is I'm very intentional about letting things go. Simple things. Okay, you start something and it's fine. You don't know what it really means to do that, and you sort of build it in. And then after a certain point in time, you get some data, you get some feedback, whether it's a feeling or it's just, you know, uh, and then you have to question yourself, ask the big questions. What can I let go of? We get very caught up on, oh, we must have this. But life is so much better when you simplify it. And that's my perspective. You know, I think when I look around, we live in a consumption world that we think, oh yeah, more this, more this, more this. But most of the time it's very short lived. We get something and, it's not great. And I think it's great to have technology. Absolutely. If I didn't have this computer, we couldn't have this conversation. But that doesn't need to be in every room, in every moment of all the time. And I look around and, I've got two young kids, and so I see their spaces, and, I'm one of those dads that goes, no, they shouldn't have more. And yet I'm the person that buys them the teddy bear that, when we go somewhere. And, and then I look around and there's something internal in my brain just goes, I just see that they play with it once, etc. And then it's not about minimalism, I don't think, because I think that's also a trend, and I dislike that because also reminds me of sort of psychopaths, just everything's clean. But I think there's this balance in, having things around, but not ruling our lives, or, creating enough space that you can move around, and creating these zones. And so back to the word money, because we often then interpret, oh, okay, this is going to cost me or the company a lot of money. And I want to understand, is that the case? And there's different angles from that, because it can be an upfront investment that might cost you money, but in the long term, like you said, the return on investment is huge. How do you think about money, people putting things in? Do you do experiments? Yeah, let's explore the world of money when it comes to all of
Okay,
this.
great. Well, I love that conversation, and that's one of the things which we are so programmed to spend money, for example, in things which are material, which are not bringing us joy. We think it's like an impulse. We buy this and we get good at we get that adrenaline impulse in that millisecond, but then it's gone. Maybe it stays in the cupboard for ages. So we're so good at that and spending that. Myself, I do that. I must tell you, I was in the fashion industry my closet is full of dresses. And I admit it. Yes, I had that. And still, once in a while, I trap myself like, I don't need this, but okay, I like it. Let's buy it. Okay. So we're putting money in yeah, in things which I believe are not making us better as humans. And we should just try to get out of our bubbles, of our cages, of our daily lives, and think bigger. And that's something which I love, which is the regenerative leadership education. You touched base about being a leader, the values. So I'm going to weave all that in one. Having CEOs, managers, like we can't see the big picture because we don't even know what is the big picture. It's the cosmos. I don't know. But trying to get those managers to understand and to think in a regenerative way, I think that is a great value for the planet. For example, I will give you an example. If a manager, if a CEO, if a founder starts from those values of, okay, we are all interconnected. We are doing, if we're doing harm to whatever, it's going to come back to us. So if we do good for employees, if we do good for, I do good for myself, if we do good for the planet in terms of what type of buildings are you setting, or what type of technology are you using, which is the provider? Are you using gas, petrol? What type of energies are you, what are your sources? Being more conscious about that and putting those values into the company, you start building up a healthier company. Let's put it that way. Okay. So that's the thing. And that's connected to, letting go, this decomposting, we call it in regenerative, decomposed. So letting go things that are not valuable anymore for you, or that are not giving you anything. That's something that we should be doing every 6 months. Take a look at, okay, what is serving us, what is not serving us. We even connect that also to design. I don't know if you heard about Marie Kondo and these things, like, okay, having everything very ordered, and if that what doesn't serve us anymore, just give it away and let that space, that energy for something else. So that's part of it. Like, okay, having more of those regenerative leaders would make that change that I was talking before about easier. The money issue is, okay, so how we're bringing this into the world, how are we educating people, business owners, etc., is what is the return on investment of all the things that this is going to provide you. So in terms of biophilic design, for example, we talk about the economical return on investment for example, in workspaces. What's going to happen if you invest and you do a space which is the way I was mentioning it before? Creativity is going to arise. It's going to go like this. When you're creative, you'll have people who are providing better quality job. Productivity is going to rise. They're going to be feeling much more at ease. So they're happier. So they are not getting sick. As you know, being sick, stress, depressions, it's one of the major problems right now in all the world. We know that a company's cost, 90% of the cost is employees. Big companies are in services, for example. So if we have flourishing people, at the long term, just have to do the maths. At the long term, this is going to be better. Just by changing the space in a flourishing way. So that's one of the things. So we are so trapped into that. And what I try to bring as well are the parts of like, what is the return on life that you're going to bring here? Like if you decide from a better way, if you make sure that you create some balconies or some rooftop with some, yeah, some trees, some plants, which you recreate biodiversity, where you get the bees to come by to pollinate, to, like if you create another ecosystem in the cities, you're going to create life. What does that mean? Well, first of all, that we all flourish from that. We will have less heat problems in the cities because we know that it's going to lower the degrees of the city. The more trees we have, the more plants we have. It's going to make like a return on so many things. And that's where we're at now. Like, okay, how can we make it measurable? Because we need to measure, even if we understand that this is like good for everyone. How can we make it measurable for people to understand that? For every second euro, dollar that we spend on this, there is a big, success behind it. So that's a thing that it's a challenge because people are still looking at, okay, I invest now and I want a return now. And we have our accountability systems are in 12 months maximum. So, okay, what it's going to bring us in 12 months? Or the political parties, they're elected for 4 years maximum. So in 4 years, what I'm going to be able to get as a return. They're not seen like in a long-term decision. And that's where we're getting it really, I think, really wrong. The same for all the case studies that we have right now, like in educational spaces. Those kids are the future of our planet. If they learn and they start thriving in spaces where they're going to get the best out of them, their talents are going to be thriving, not mathematics only, but their talents. So they're going to be doing things where they're flourishing. So we will have these type of leaders in the future, which are going to be putting those values, and yeah, that's a ripple effect. And I can go on and on. I know. Sorry, Colin.
I no, never apologize for that. It's very intoxicating to hear you talk about that because, again,
Intoxicating.
no, it is because we live in this I spend now, I want the reward now, and
Mhm.
I don't know how it was before, but we seem obsessed, as in, I go to the gym once, I want to look, perfect, and we have that, I spend, I get straight away. And something, I've been trying to create different businesses for a long time, just on the side. I'm fascinated by it. And you know what? Something rarely comes out is that building it for the longer term. Most of the time it's like, people will sell you a course. Okay, yeah, you can, within a short space of time, you can earn this amount of money. It's always that we're in a rush against time to make money.
Mhm.
And I've through doing what I do now, I set myself a time limit. I'm self-funding this for a while, but something really came through that I want this to be something for the future. And you know, I could have turned what I do. Well, I could have made tried to make money from day one, and I've never done that. It was always about the connections. It was always about enjoying it and having fun, and um, by doing that, actually, it's created this whole different outlook on something. I go, yeah, I found something I really love to do, and yeah, I've had to put money behind it and quite a considerable amount at some points, which is quite a scary concept. But I I feel that I've created the foundations for something longevity, and and I can't put my finger on that. I can't, when people want this, um, you know, well, what's your plan? What are you getting out of this? How's this? I can't give it to them, and I think, and that's the problem with things like business plans. What are you going to get? And it's longer term. And like you said about the children, and I didn't even think about it because we just think about ourselves. We very rarely think about the generations after us. Even though I've got kids, I kind of go, well, what is this for me now? And then, we talked earlier about having younger kids, and we all say that the world is going to go, AI is just going to run everything. But okay, if that's going to happen, I'm not here to say yes or no, but they say all the jobs will go. Well, why don't we create those thinking spaces? AI can't replicate who we are and how we are. I know it's trying to do a good job, but fundamentally, you know, thinking about much deeper issues, and you need environments where you can just think about that, not just be reactive all the time. And business seems to be reactive, first to the market, etc. But maybe taking a bit longer to see beyond the next 12 months what this is. And in order, like you said, politicians sort of make decisions because they want to see it so then they can get re-elected, etc. But actually thinking longer term, and that you mentioned about having a space on the roof with like bees or trees and things like that. We seem to want to turn the world upside down immediately, but all of these things take time, and it doesn't need to be, throw everything out and then replace it. It can start very small, and it can be about proving to yourself, seeing the data, not necessarily in a tangible way, but seeing how that shows up for your staff, how people are reacting to that, and I've recently started to experiment in my life, and that that works very well, because I always think when we say, right, we're going to do this, if it doesn't work out, it's a failure. Whereas experimenting for me is, I'm just going to try this for a period of time, and then either it doesn't work and I just accept that was a learning, or you go, okay, it didn't quite get me what I thought it was going to get, but I just need to tweak a few things. I don't need to throw everything out. And so I think in that sense that, it's stepping stones into getting into a new world. And then the last part really, I think, is during COVID, a lot of people work from home. And I've often talked about, I think one of the big things that people loved about working from home was this freedom and flexibility and autonomy over their time. And I've never really thought about the environment. Now, oftentimes we think, oh, people had to rush and they shoved a very small desk into the corner of a bedroom or something like that. But over time, I think those things have evolved, and people have said, oh, okay, no, I can. And so I actually set up this desk here. This is my apartment, but there's a huge patio window here, and I'm very fortunate. There's a huge field behind that. Sometimes there's deers and things like that running past. And so then with that, there was this big call that everyone go back to the office. And I felt it was, that seemed more about control from the leaders. Okay, we've got to do this. And I think this is an amazing opportunity, because one of the things I couldn't understand is that a lot of leaders were saying, all right, so they were having these massive buildings that they either rented or they'd bought. And they were really struggling with capacity a lot of the times. They were having, they were growing, etc. So then COVID hit, and then oftentimes those buildings were very underoccupied. And I feel that there's this massive opportunity here to say, okay, we don't need the massive building. We can make it smaller but better, and take the overall cost, bring it down, and say, right, this is something that we're going to create, the real central place. And not to convince people to come back to the office. Oftentimes it's the leader saying, yep, you're back in the office, making a decision over people's lives because I pay you, you're going to come. Why don't you create a space where people want to come? They want to be there. Not all the time, but they can thrive. Why can't we have that balance in organizations? Just say, right, okay, yeah, we don't need an office with 1,000 people. Let's cut it in half, but let's do this with real intention, we can do it. We're smart enough. We've got the technology even to sort of schedule all of that. We've got all of that. Use it in a wise way to do less but better. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. It's but still, there is something which is coming to my head. It's okay. There, mm, there are many companies who are so how the accountability it's structured, and how companies are also earning monies on their buildings, and so that's a part of it which has to be reversed. And so big companies, they're owning so many properties, and that's part of their business, even if they're not into the real estate world. So how do we change that? Yeah, for example, financing and fiscality, that's not making big companies with big properties, development properties, gain more money from that, because that's the snake who is beating the tail all the time. We're going into to the same thing. As long as we don't change those policies, those yeah, fiscal years, those rules, there is an eager to yeah, to have the economy as we're having now. So it is much more complicated than that. But for small companies, yes, there are many small companies who have decided to have their the payroll half at home, half at their space, and they're starting to invest, and they see that they need to create better spaces because that's a great opportunity for them. So that has been changing for us as well as interior designers. We've seen a big change in how people started to design their homes, and there's a big opportunity for us with everything that I've told before to educate them to create better spaces, their sanctuaries, their places where they can thrive, play, connect, cry, everything into a home. So that's yeah, that's a big thing to start changing all that. But it's little steps at a time. And if you already know something about it, because that's the thing, we don't know. What I'm telling you today, most people don't know. But when you start learning those things and understanding, like, okay, that can have a big impact in this and that, you might change a little bit. And as you said, self the autonomy, that freedom that we had in COVID was so so amazing. I really loved that period at home with my kids. I had to work a lot because I had to educate my kids as well at the same time, but it was so nice. We used to go into the garden, and we had a very a nicer experience. So why don't we learn from that? From that, we've seen what happened to the cities. All of a sudden, there was all kind of animals and vegetation coming from everywhere and flourishing everywhere. Wow, everything was rewilding, as we call it. Amazing. And there's something I want to leave everyone with is we mentioned about the kids and the importance of creating spaces for the kids, but I always bring this into our conversations to my cohorts and even symposiums that we create. Um, why don't we think more than just generation? Why don't we just think 7 generations ahead? Our grandma, and the impact that everything that we're going to do today is impacting them 7 generations behind, and the other way around. So get that perspective of me being now, and think about a bigger system around us and how does that impact. So that's a beautiful a knowledge from ancient indigenous people, and we have so much to learn from them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's I think that's a great place to sort of end the conversation. I'm very mindful of the time, but I was actually having a conversation with a lady called Rhonda Bowen, and she's building this system that basically takes artificial intelligence, nature, and human intelligence, and putting it all together, because we have we have everything that we need, but we're often just using one of those things. We're relying on AI to run everything. But nature has so many of the answers, and we're trying to be more smarter than we need to be. You know, nature has survived for, however long you want
Mhm.
to say, and you go, okay, why don't we look at that? Why don't we bring that knowledge and wisdom together? And it's about bringing those three things together in a way that is accessible to everybody. You know, even if you're in a third world country, just having the availability of that information, because um, and it's basically the wisdom. You know, is called Midwise, the company she's creating. And the fact is that, we look at oftentimes, people that stand out in the media, etc. Let's talk about Elon Musk, because it's easy to point out. Most people know, and whatever his views are of the world, etc. We seem to be looking at him to solve, like, sort of sustainability and, global warming in that way, and, through electric and solar power, etc. But actually, there's, you know, we're we're kind of putting a lot of bets on one person or a company, but there's so much wisdom within between. The people, not living in disasters necessarily, but the people in between. But they just don't have a platform to be able to share and to bring that knowledge together. And she's trying to create that, which I think is such a a fundamentally brilliant idea. And I think if she can pull it off, it's going to really help, because we have all this knowledge, and, in like indigenous people have all of this
Mhm.
knowledge that, for some reason we want to just go and take without discussing or asking,
Yeah.
but being able to bring all of that knowledge and that wisdom, indigenous people had the understanding of the land, nature, so much better than us, because we thought at some point we are smarter than all of that. But
Yeah.
and so I think, looking back can also help us look forward, right? What have we got wrong? What have we overlooked? What have we discounted? And you know, well, you can think about it just in terms of, the drug companies. I know. Um, we're always trying to create new drugs, but the reality is those drugs aren't always as effective as, some of the natural remedies. And I know, I've started to sort of surround myself with people that, really go back to basics in terms of medicating and looking at some of those things that can really change, rather than just rely on like pharma um, for medicating. And you know, they can be so much more effective, but for some reason,
Mhm.
we can't get into all of that. But, we've convinced ourselves that, we create brand new things, but they're not always as effective. They look like they're effective because they're marketed in a way that makes us think they are. But yeah, I think, yeah, in terms of today's conversation, like I said, it's very intoxicating to hear you talk about that. It's not a space that I've ever really considered, and it almost gave me permission to think back and say to myself, yeah, okay, maybe I did understand actually that the spaces that I was working in wasn't right for me, and that, yeah, we can talk, we can mention this, we can raise it. It is an important part of how we live our lives. Like you say, we go to work for 8 hours. I would suggest at a minimum. That it's important to design those spaces where we want to flourish, not for today, not just for today, but for generations to come. And I think I've really enjoyed this conversation. There's so much to think about, and I'm sure there's so many different areas that we can dig into. So,
Yes.
if people listening want to put some comments in, if they they want a round two with you, maybe we do a Q&A. We'll see what the responses are. But for today, I have to say this was amazing, really, really thought provoking. But for people that want to reach out to you, where's the best place? Is it LinkedIn where I found you, website, association? Where should they go?
LinkedIn, it's a great place. I'm quite active there. Otherwise, they can reach out to Habitat Harmonia Academy. This is where we are creating all that educational platform and creating a community, an ecosystem. So that's where we sell our courses, our retreats. Um, we're doing a massive symposium in July in Amsterdam, and we're inviting, well, researchers and massive architects who are already implementing some of the things that we're doing to start changing the conversations and do that paradigm shift. So mindbodyspace.org, that's the website. And you can always, connect with me, as I said, via LinkedIn, and I will respond in 1 or 2 days maximum. So yeah, but it was
Fantastic.
great. Did a great conversation, Colin, and so many other ideas that are coming to me while you were talking. The pharma industry, another sector, natural products, another. So many. Everything is interconnected, and I think going backwards and seeing what, as you said, what didn't work well, it's a good start. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe round two is definitely on the cards for you and me, just to explore those topics then. Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. But for today, as I say, it was a real pleasure, very thought provoking. I appreciate you giving me your time.
It was a pleasure, Colin. Thank you as well for inviting me here. It was great. I loved it.
Okay. All right. Lovely. Take care, Nora. Bye.
Take care.
Bye. It's me again. So just a quick ask at the end of this video. So my plan is to grow this channel, to have more conversations, to get more interesting guests, to have live, genuine conversations. Now, if you're a follower of YouTube, all the channels say the same thing, and I'm going to have to do it. If you like it, please subscribe and hit the bell notifications. It's quite easy, but it just gives me some feedback to understand what you like and allows me to bring those conversations to you. So I'd really appreciate it. It's pretty quick, pretty simple to do. If you've got any comments, let me know as well. You know, if there's questions you think I should have asked, I'm open to feedback, constructive, of course. But let me know. And I really appreciate your support.